most bad managers don't know that they're bad, so they don't need to get better. As human beings, we're terrible at two things. One, remembering and holding each other accountable, and we're just going to automate some of those things. If you think you can't build culture remotely, yet you can build the closest friends you'll probably ever have playing Call of Duty on Xbox Live, then I think your concept of how to build culture is flawed. I would say almost everybody wants performance over presence, yet they don't know how to manage performance, so instead they manage presence. That's the office. That's why they want to go back, because they don't know how to manage performance.
Welcome to the Generation Hustle Podcast, a show that explores the world of business, entrepreneurship, and culture, all centered around the millennial. I'm your co-host Sherison, alongside my good friend Amin, and this week, we're going to try and help you deal with bad managers. Or at least our guests will try. Episode 48 is with Brennan McEachran, co-founder and CEO of Soapbox, the app built for managers. Managers have been the most unsupported and under-resourced individuals in corporate organizations by far, and the consequences of this are immediate. Bad leadership trickles down to teams, culture, and eventually starts to show in the company performance. Soapbox is the first software platform designed to help managers prioritize their people and performance while coaching good management habits. It manages meetings, tasks, and goals, all while providing constructive feedback and relevant engagement tools to give employees a voice. So we talked to Brennan about his founding journey, the traits and habits of a good manager, and how you can become a better leader in any setting. This was a really insightful conversation that we hope you enjoy.
Yes, thanks again.
Happy to be here, guys. Anytime.
Right. Let's start off with kind of Soapbox and kind of what you guys are doing. So the company itself is on a mission to make better managers around the globe, and that's something that all of us can get behind, I think. So talk to us about the company, kind of how did you come up with the idea, and kind of what is your company looking to do through their product?
Yeah, we're actually about to go through a rebrand, so I don't know when's the podcast going to go live. Can I say the new brand or?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead. Yeah.
Oh, no, I don't know. I'm too nervous. Now I'm too nervous. I'll save it. That can be the secret. That can be the secret. The
we'll have
scavenger
like a
hunt for the
bonus clip
listeners
at the end, which we'll release after you've rebranded.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, so, this all kind of comes in. I mean, Soapbox has been around for a while, and we're kind of coming out of really, I think, what is effectively a pivot. I just didn't know it was a pivot at the time. And, we slowly iterated on the product. We slowly iterated on the messaging. And, now if I look back like 2 years, it's a totally different company, but I didn't like each iteration didn't feel that way. So, but I mean, you got it right. We're on a mission to make better managers. I kind of really internalized this as like fix bad management, more so than make better managers. I think most bad managers don't know that they're bad, so they don't need to get better, right? It's almost, it's almost like for whatever reason, I think of this like with a golf analogy, right? Like there's people who want to become better golfers, and then there's people who just don't want to suck, right? And the people who really want to get better are like the pros. Yeah. And so I don't know how much they're spending on clubs, but it's probably a lot. And then there's like everyone else who is like, listen, I'm not bad, but they like adjust their score with a handicap.
Or you see me putting with a driver.
That's right. Yeah. Like it doesn't really matter. Like let's just hit the ball. Right.
Yeah.
And genuinely a lot of management is that it's like, listen, we're not talking about, Tiger Woods level. We're talking about like, 2 hands on the club, swing, make contact with the ball. It's not like the majority of our, management stuff that we help people with is not rocket science. It's just taking the best practices that are hard because we're human beings, making them a little bit easier through software. So, a lot of that comes down to like the time you spend with your team, making that really intentional, holding your group accountable, having your group, manage up better to you, pick up 80% of business books and they're going to tell you how to do these concepts. The reason that, every day there's a new business book that comes out preaching the exact same concepts is because it's hard to do because we're humans. And so, software is there to help us in basically every other aspect of our lives, except management. And so we said, let's see if we can build software that genuinely helps this. And, through iterations, I think we got to something that is, extremely helpful for the first time manager who's never managed before, all the way up to the CEO who's been, managing people for the vast majority of his or her career. Because here's kind of the kicker with this. No one, and I mean this genuinely, gets trained to be a manager. The one thing we all have a shared experience with, everybody, by the way, has a shared experience with this, is like that group project where you did all the work, right?
Yeah.
How come we never get trained on how to like properly figure out that situation? Because at a certain point in your career, your job is just that, right? Like your job is just that group project where you got to make sure everyone does their work, right? And then you go to university. If you're any good, like you go to university, right? If you're any good, you get a job right out of school. If you're any good, you get promoted to management. But you've got 8 years of training as a software developer through university and through on-the-job training. You've got 8 years of training as a salesperson, right? You got 8 years of training, and all of a sudden someone disguises your next promotion, right? Or disguises your career change as a promotion. Says like, hey, by the way, I don't want you to dev anymore. Hey, by the way, I don't want you to actually market. I want you to manage marketers. Oh, by the way, you do not sell. Not allowed to sell anymore.
Yeah.
Make more people who can sell as good as you. Totally different job.
Yeah.
Right.
Totally different task. Way harder. Oh, and by the way, you will not get training for it. I mean that like broadly speaking, the average manager goes 10 years into their career before they get one single minute of training, right? So basically training is trial and error. Just like cold calling or dev, like you like push a bug, fix a bug.
Yep.
Except this is like people's lives, right?
Yeah.
So the most training we get is business books. Hopefully you read them. Hopefully you retain it. You try some of these things. And that's why, like, as embarrassing as it is, and then I'll stop the rant, but like you guys know the book, The Art of War by Sun Tzu, right? That book is 500 years older than Jesus, right? We're still using that book to use analogies on how to lead teams, how to lead large groups and large organizations of people. Oh, these are some of the patterns because at the end of the day, we're all human, and humans haven't changed much since, right?
Right.
The one thing I think that's really embarrassing is the fact that books or that technology, books and pieces of paper, is largely how organizations are enabling their highest paid workers, right? Managers, management, largely are showing up to meetings. If they want to look like they're diligent and prepared, they have a moleskin notebook, and it's like, all right, you're doing a good job. Meanwhile, you have your devs with like 4 monitors and like they're typing nonstop headphones, right? And then you get the people who are paid more than them, and they show up with a piece of paper. And it's like, I think that's embarrassing. So we're on a mission to really take, some of this stuff honestly into the 20th century, right? Like not even the next century, and add some computers and text to it. And, luckily the millennials who are now in management positions are like, wait a second, there was never an app for this, right?
Yeah.
And we're here. And like genuinely, I mean it, like that was my path, right? Like how did this happen? That was my path. I started a company when I was 19, successful enough at growing that company until I managed, directly or indirectly 40 people. Dude, I was a 19-year-old who happened to become good enough at building a business that I was no longer allowed to do any of the tasks. I had to just full-time manage people. And I was like, hold on a second. Like I can download a framework to build an app and, use open source code. And there's CRMs to help me sell. And there's marketing to help me like market.
Yeah.
And then now I have to use like, if I'm like high tech, I'm using a spreadsheet to manage. Like, come on, this is nuts. Yeah. So really, it just started like scratching my own itch. Like, I need a system and a tool to help me be good at the stuff that I'm just not good at. And it turns out we're all not good at that stuff, or we're all not good at showing up prepared. We're all not good at organizing. We're all not good at holding your team accountable. We're all not good at actually coaching people or giving feedback. And so the app, helps you do those things in really, really subtle ways that allow you to have, twice as much free time that's stress-free at work as a manager.
For sure. Yeah, dude, I love that analogy. And I feel like you touched on something really cool there. I've always thought it was weird that a lot of, in corporate environments, a lot of managerial positions, requirements to get in are results-driven, but the role itself is people-driven, right? It's like, oh, you, like you said, it's like you made like this many sales, incredible, we're going to promote you. But now don't do sales, manage people to get those sales. That doesn't make sense.
It's
right?
this interesting thing of like taste and ability, right? And like Ira Glass has this like beautiful little monologue on it. But I think it's a proxy for what a good job looks like, and that's about we've admitted, like almost as a race, right? Like we've admitted this as like a species, that like we're just not going to train you for leadership. You just have to know what a good job looks like below you and tell people, right? And so the proxy for a good manager, by default effectively becomes, oh, you're good at sales, therefore you know what a good salesperson does. So I need you to make more of yourself. And you're complaining you want more money, so I'm going to give you a promotion, and kind of tie all those things together. The reality is, like, your top most productive dev engineer might not have the right traits to be your VP of engineering. Your most productive, highest paid, hitting quota sales rep might not have the right skill sets to be your VP of sales. That's okay. But then what happens is people get stuck where they fail in management, right? Like you progress up into your Peter principle, you progress up into the point that you no longer are able to get the next promotion because you're bad, right? Like your team is not hitting quota. So at that point, you're going to be stuck there forever as an underperforming manager. And eventually a lot of these large companies end up with basically people progress upwards until the point of their incompetence, and then they get stuck. And so you have like middle management is incompetent. And largely it's because they're just left to fend for themselves. So turns out most of the stuff that makes good managers isn't rocket science, right? It's just hard. It's just hard in the same way that like communicating with your wife isn't rocket science. Doesn't make it easy, right? Or raising kids isn't necessarily rocket science, but like, man, we screw that up every day. It's just these little things, right? And if you can be intentional about it, and maybe help people see their blind spots, then you can make 1% improvements every single day, and that adds up.
For sure. That resonates with us. We have a finance background, especially coming through accounting. It's like, it's really hard to find a really good manager who's really good at accounting as well. So to that point, like with Soapbox, can you tell us an example of how you guys are actually helping us? So like if I'm a manager, what am I seeing, and what am I kind of getting? What kind of advice am I getting as I'm working with my employees?
Yeah, so I'll walk you through like a little bit of a framework, and then I'll try to describe it in a word. But we basically help you, I would say, with like three core areas of management. The first is your weekly actions, right? We kind of take a different view on it than everyone else. We're more like, hey, let's get the reps and sets, right? Like let's get the little stuff going, and then work our way up to the bigger things. If you can kind of win the day, you can win the week, you can win the month, you can win the quarter. And so that starts with meetings, right? That's the weekly action stuff. As a manager, there's this quote by a guy named Andy Grove, the founder of Intel. Meetings are the medium for management or managerial work, right? Like, as a manager, you're having a one-on-one with an employee. That's your moment to kind of flex your managerial might. You have a team meeting, you have a town hall, you have those moments with your team. That's, time for you to put on kind of your management, manager role, facade, whatever, and do manager things. And so we want to make sure that in those moments you do a great job. The way we do that is just really, really simple tools baked into your workflow that allow you to, create an agenda on time, give people the opportunity to add things that they want to talk about. So you're not being surprised by, that random person on your team saying, well, what about this thing you never thought of? Right. And then you have to react. The goal is like in that moment, let's have you resolve problems versus discover issues. It's going to make you look and feel much better. And your team is going to save a week, right? Because instead of meeting number one, discovering an issue, meeting number two, resolving it, let's discover the issues async and solve the issues synchronously and commit and leave. The next part about it, on the weekly action side is like leaving a meeting. What are the next steps? Why did we just meet? So you document those in app, and then we'll help you hold your team accountable to it. it's little things like with the workflow that allow you to kind of stack these concepts together. So leading up to the meeting, what do you want to talk about? We ask your team. That becomes your agenda. You drag and drop. That agenda becomes, your order of operations of what you're going to talk about while you're in the room. It pops up on top of like your Google Meet or your video call. So when you join the video call, it's there. You don't even have to remember to use it. It pops up live. You hit each item on your list, check it off as you go. We hit you with confetti and endorphins to like encourage you. That agenda becomes your notes, right? Like as you say, hey, let's talk about our metrics. You say you've talked about it. Cool. Take your note. Cool. When that meeting's over, we send out notes to everyone who's been a part of it. That includes the action items. Software is really good at remembering things. So we nudge everyone, bug everyone, micromanage for you. So you don't have to be the micromanager, right? Like, did you get your thing done? Did you, the thing you said you did you do it? That also gives you really good notes, right? So next week, when the time comes and you're like, didn't we talk about this last time? You're actually able to be like, we did. We decided this, and you were supposed to do that. Okay, go do that. Let's not talk about this anymore, right?
Right.
And all of a sudden, you go from being someone who is kind of stumbling their way through like some of these managerial tasks to like, dude, you're like a battle-tested, hardened like COO, right? Just with a couple of these small habits. And that's like the bucket I consider weekly action. So that's your one-on-ones, your team meetings, anything that's recurring in your calendar. We do a good job of just helping you out. And there's templates and there's conversation, all that stuff.
Right.
We've got AI running. So if you aren't talking about certain topics, we're going to bug you and say, listen, you've had, 3 one-on-ones with a person on our team. You've never brought up their career development. That's probably a ticking time bomb. You should do it. Here's how you do it. Right. So we have all that built in, baked in.
Cool.
The next bucket is the quarterly stuff, the longer term stuff. So that's like goals, OKRs, things like that. So in our app, same thing. Each meeting should have, if it's a recurring meeting, should probably have a goal, a stated priority or purpose. If it's one-on-ones, that might be career development, right? That might be, if it's a team meeting, it might be like, what are the metrics we're pushing for? Right. We have an area to put some of those things and track some of those things. But the two superpowers there is we actually have the largest library of goal examples on the internet built into our app. So you don't have to come up with these goals. You can actually just peruse like, what are other companies doing for these roles? Like if you've never managed, you're a good developer, you now manage a team of developers, you've never managed DevOps before, you don't have to like read a textbook on like, what should DevOps people do? You can just steal a goal from some other company. Or you've never managed a sales rep before because you're a CS person, and right? Just steal that, right? You never managed finance before, or like the interesting thing is like you become a CFO and all of a sudden HR reports into you and you've got to help HR. Like what?
I was checking that out yesterday, actually. Like I was looking at the VP of Finance goals that you had listed. I'm like, holy shit, I never thought about this.
Yeah, just steal.
So let me add it in, right?
Yeah, you just steal them and then you edit them. Right. And actually, the bigger benefit is it's all collaborative and live. So you actually say to your team, you're like, listen, team, I can come up with your goals, but you can too. So go in there and find goals you think are right for us. Add it in there. Let's talk about it. And what you'll get is better buy-in and, increased understanding of what those goals are and why you've chosen them. And then the superpower of our app is once you set those, they automatically add themselves to the top of your agenda. So you're starting every meeting with the important stuff first, then the urgent stuff. And if you do that one thing and you meet with your team weekly, you're 95% more likely to actually hit your quarterly goals. Right. Simply because as human beings, we're terrible at two things. One, remembering. Right. And holding each other accountable. And we're just going to automate some of those things, right? Like you have your routine of meeting every single week. Your routine now starts with the most important things. You can, of course, drag and drop it. But like the default settings here are good management settings, right? Not bad management settings. So you happen to fall into these good traits. And then the last thing we do is just the morale and motivation. I think we've all been a part of a team, say a sales team, whatever. Like we've all been a part of a team where sales morale is low. You're not going to hit your goals, right? Yeah. Or you've been a part of a dev team or a finance team and like people hate it. Like, work's not going well. And that's the loop, right? So you want your weekly actions to tie into your quarterly actions. You want your quarterly actions to kind of have a pulse on what morale is. So you can adjust the plan to figure out, well, if everyone is absolutely, gutted and demotivated because they think the goals are absolutely unattainable, let's tweak things so that we get that extra productivity and willpower back on our team so we can get back to performing instead of kind of moping along to try to hit the end of the quarter or like get the monthly reports out or whatever. So that's what it all comes down to, is just that kind of vicious cycle that we know leads to high performing teams. We do that in a really integrated way, so you don't feel like it's another app, right? Like it's integrated to Slack, it's integrated to Google Meet, it's integrated to Zoom, it's integrated to Google Calendar, Outlook. So you just like you would use Zoom, right? You're using Soapbox, and that helps you do all the management stuff and stay organized that you need. And the rest kind of just layers and stacks on top of itself. So we're literally using some organizations just with a single individual person, 5 direct reports, all the way up to CEOs of multinational companies using it with their exec team, who then use it with their team, who then use it with their team. And we have some stuff, where you can have like an AMA with the CEO. So it doesn't matter how big that meeting is. If you got a meeting with 300 people, you can kind of use Soapbox in a different way. And once you get up to like that size, like real leadership, your meetings are different. You don't want people to contribute in the same way you would if it was like 5 people. So it's free. Check it out. Soapboxhq.com. It'll redirect you to the new URL. Don't worry.
Okay.
Whenever
so we'll
that
figure out what that is beforehand. But you a good point there. Building productive teams is not really easy. It obviously takes time, and one of the roles that you're in is obviously you're managing and building a company. So selling the vision of your company is also an incredibly important part in terms of getting buy-in and having productivity across your team. So how have you kind of maintained that messaging for Soapbox? And how have you used the tools that you just described in terms of, keeping that consistent vision and keeping morale up and keeping, growth going?
Yeah. Well, I mean, a good chunk of it is context sharing, right? Yeah. Like one of the big things people, particularly in high growth companies, one of the big reasons people leave basically boils down to they're not learning or growing fast enough. So if you get these people who are high growth people, which is obviously the only people you want, really, they're going to leave you because they feel like they can grow faster, better somewhere else, right? So that's number one. The other reason people leave is because their managers are awful, right? And so the good news is like, 2 birds, 1 stone, right? Like if you have a great manager, that manager is going to enable growth, and then that other problem doesn't exist, right? So what I'll say is like, what do those people need? Because I think you really got to adjust. Part of the reason I think like you get paid more as a manager is you've got to adjust your style for your team, not your team adjusting for you. So, so step 1 is like, what does the team need? You got to know that. Like, what motivates the team? What does the team care about? What is the team going to respond to? You got to know that. And part of that is just by, genuinely learning that, like care enough about your team to understand, what motivates them, what demotivates them, what's happening outside of work that might slow them down or speed them up or lead them to burnout, right? You should know those things. But, beyond that, the other stuff that really matters for the team is especially today, I would say is like, and remote, we care way more about people instead of process. So right. Build the process around the people. If the people change, which they do, that means the process might change, could change, right? We care a lot more about performance instead of presence, right? Like if people show up at 10 versus 9, who cares? Get your job done, right? We care more about, results than we do about being busy. We care more about, and so I think you got to look at some of those things, and then, it's autonomy and accountability is kind of the last bit. And some people don't want the autonomy, but most high growth people do. And so, that's almost like, you got to be comfortable enough with it as a manager to let your people fall and stumble and learn, right?
Right.
Provide some of those guardrails to teach. And so I actually think, a huge job is not telling people what to do. I think a lot of people think of being a boss, being a manager as someone who's like, oh, I get to, tell people what to do. I have power. I actually think it's less about that. I think it's more like a teacher in a classroom. Like, I'm going to teach you everything about the business that I know.
Yeah.
Right. And I give you every bit of data, every bit of understanding, every bit of learning that I've learned.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
And then what I'm going to do is allow you, the person who's supposed to be the smartest person, like we hire smart people for roles. Like, you're supposed to be good at content marketing. You're supposed to be good at sales. You're supposed to be good, right? I hope you're better at me than those roles. Here's everything I know. Let's go get it. Right. Let's do it together. We're a team. And I'm here to listen for your ways of doing that and accomplishing it. And so I think a big part is like, teach them everything they need to know, share that context, and then give them the freedom to, take the things they're good at and try it out. And I think what you want to do as a manager is just provide some of that continuity of learning as employees come and go. But if you can give them true accountability, you'll have people who aren't employees, they'll be owners, right? Even if it's just of a function. And I think there's a difference between, like the saying is like, there's a difference between parents and nannies, right? I think you want to have on your team, you want to have people who are more like parents than like, like the nanny, right? I think the way to do that is like, hey, here's everything I know. You're the expert at it, sink or swim, and I'm here to coach you. I'm here to help you learn and get good. I'm not here to fire you if you don't do what I say, right? And if you think I'm telling you to do something and it's stupid, you're doing me a disservice if you don't tell me that, right? I need you to tell that. So a lot of it is context on the goals. It's context on why you do things. It's context on the process. It's context. It's a lot of learning and talking and sharing so that people have that information. So when they're faced with a situation, they make the right decision themselves, right? Yeah. And that takes a lot of time and a lot of energy and a lot of effort on behalf of the manager to get their team to the point where, if you're on a vacation, your team's making the right calls. And that's work. That's management work, right? I think the other part is like, feedback on you. Like, we started the podcast, no one gets training for this job. And so the default is we're all bad golfers, right?
Right.
Yeah.
The difference is, like, similar to golfers, is like, as a manager, you have the club, you have the power, right? Like, you can fire them. So it's not like a friend, like, giving feedback to a friend or whatever. Like, no. A lot of people are scared of you. You're wielding this metal rod. And so you got to create a safe place for them to tell you how you can improve. Right. And so, like, the thing I was sharing on LinkedIn the other day is like the Lettuce Pact, right? Like, if you've got salad in your teeth, is your team going to interrupt you mid-sentence and be like, dude, you have salad in your teeth? Because if they're not going to do that, and that's like a pretty easy thing, comparably to do, are they going to tell you the important feedback? Probably not. So you got to create those environments where you can get better, because your team is going to be limited by you, right? And the best thing you can get to is like the questions you are asking yourself as a manager, or the questions you're asking your boss. How do you get your team to ask you those questions, right? Like, in a way you actually don't want to exist. You want to get your team to ask you the questions you would ask your boss. And that allows you to go on vacation, because then they can just straight up ask that boss, and you're actually not even needed there. I think sometimes people are scared about that. Like, will I become irrelevant? That's kind of the goal, right? Like, that allows you to scale as a business. I mean, you got to check in on all these things, but it's like everything else. It's habits that add up. It's habits that stack. That's work. So, I've got one-on-ones weekly with everyone on my team. I've got team meetings with, we got coverage for it. I let people hire. I still have veto rights on hiring, but I let people hire. And they know the process. I hold them to the process and they learn, right? But but I think all of it comes down to just those little things that you gotta do right. And I think the big thing is, at a certain point, you got to make sure the lessons you've learned the hard way, that, you find a way to make sure your team doesn't also learn them the hard way. Right.
Yeah.
But without yelling at them.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I wholeheartedly agree with everything that you said there. I think we're in a little bit of that shift where, a lot of employees have that mindset where it's like they just want to be told what to do, and that's like that kind of way of work is not going to be relevant in the next maybe decade or so. I think the creative work is where things are kind of shifting, and it kind of requires that critical thinking more.
Yeah, it depends on the company. I mean, some companies are okay with that, right? And like, I think a lot of companies aren't. In particular, like the smaller the company, the less likely you are to have that ability. Like, things change too quickly, particularly in tech.
Yeah.
For you to ever really get there. So, I think in tech, places or high growth places, I think it's less about learning the process or learning the script or learning the tasks or learning the whatever. And it becomes a lot more about learning how to learn, right?
Yeah.
The tech's going to change, the process is going to change, the market's going to change. You've got to find a way to ensure when that happens, you're doing the right call. And like that, to me, ultimately, like if you follow that chain of reasoning, far enough, the only process that doesn't change is staying close to your customers and talking to them a lot, staying close to the market, like prospects, and talking to them a lot, because they're the only ones that you can really rely on as like the ultimate source of truth. So I think every role should probably do that. Outside of that, let everything else change.
You've kind of labeled a lot of actionable items that we should be doing to kind of make these changes. And usually those are always tied to kind of some kind of trait or characteristics. And kind of from your experience and through working with Soapbox, can you tell us maybe your definition of a leader, like what leadership means to you, and kind of what traits that you've seen in good leaders who kind of live this ethos that you've just pretty much described?
I think, so I'll start by just saying, like, I don't think leaders are born. I do think there are certain things that you're born with that make you statistically more likely to be a leader, but that doesn't mean you're a good leader, right?
Yeah.
I think it's much more likely that good leadership is taught. And in fact, good leadership tends to be born out of experiences with bad leadership. Like, statistically, you're more likely to learn how to become a good boss by being under multiple bad bosses. Right? Like, you know what not to do is actually better training than never having to think about leadership because your boss is just so great, right?
Right.
So I do think leadership is something that's learned. I think anyone can do it. I think people who like it more are going to naturally get better at it. But I think the first thing for leadership is two things. One is like internal locus of control, which is like PhD speak for like, you believe problems are within your control, not outside of your control, right? So if something goes wrong, you genuinely think that your actions could have caused it to go a different way. I think that's a key trait. Otherwise, you're just going to blame, and you're right. But that's, I think, something you can get better at. I think that's something that typically, like, the lower you are in the totem pole, it's easier to kind of point fingers and say like, oh, I don't know, I was just told to do it this way. Whereas I think leaders, like, I definitely don't have that excuse, right? Like, my employees blame me for problems, and my board blames me for problems, and my wife blames me for working too late, right?
Yeah.
And my customers blame me. So I can't point a finger, right? And I think your life's going to be easier if you just get comfortable with that. I think that's one. I think being humble is another one. You should be getting feedback from your board, your customers, your employees, and your wife or significant other, right? To get better. And if you have a big ego about you being the Messiah character in your storyline, like, you're probably going to be a leader, but you just might not be a well-loved one.
Right.
And so, you're going to be like the WeWork style guy or whatever his name was, Adam Newman. There's a big fall at some point in your career. So those are traits that anyone can have, I think, except for like, folks that are born psychopaths, which is a shockingly low amount of people. But a big part of that is practice, right? Just like everything else. I think other things that are helpful trait wise, are like, being organized, being engaged, trying hard. All of these things are like, whatever. But there are things that can influence that, right? Like, you have less willpower if you're sleep deprived. So like, that's a little thing. Like like everyone thinks like leaders, like high powered leaders sleep like 4 hours a day. Like statistically, actually, millionaires sleep 7 hours a day, but billionaires sleep 8 hours a day.
Right.
Yeah. So depends what you want to do, right? Like there's little things that add up. And I think, showing up ready to go is a big part of it. And the rest, honestly, I think is like, how can you enable yourself to grow the fastest and learn the most and learn faster than your peers? And the best way to do that is to get feedback from people around you and have smart, more successful people report to you, right? So get good at hiring, get good at firing, and then make sure you have enough psychological safety on your team that your team is willing to invest in your growth. They're willing to spend the effort to teach you how to get better at your own job, even though their job is not to do that. Their job is to actually do their job, right? But if you can get smarter people around you, and they're willing to invest in your growth, then you're going to grow faster. And honestly, that's gonna take real raw human energy out of your soul to do that. Like you're going to have to care about them more than they care about you. You're going to have to do that for 8 people, not for one person, right?
Yeah.
And then you should do that for everyone, like who's a peer and people who are above you. That takes a lot of energy. So I think spend that energy, right? Spend it wisely and make sure you're not investing that energy on people who don't care. I think that's key. And then, the rest of it, I think, is just accepting the feedback you get, taking it as something you can fix and trying to get better, right? Whether it's reading those books or trying trial and error, trying new things at work, or asking for advice, or, being vulnerable and saying you're working on something. I think a lot of it comes down to some of those intangibles. And then the big one, honestly, like for me, is I genuinely think a big part of my job is to be comfortable being the stupid one in the room. Like I'll ask the stupid questions.
Yeah.
Right. And that takes, I think other people would say that takes confidence, right? Like other people would say like, oh, you got to be confident to ask some of those stupid questions. It really doesn't. It takes like blissful ignorance really is what it takes. But the truth is like, it takes a lot of confidence to not ask the stupid question and just assume you know it all. Right. And so like, I don't know if I would describe myself as the most confident person. I think I become more confident when I ask the stupid questions because then I just know the answers. So I genuinely, I don't think you're like born, with the captain's, band or like the number on your jersey. Like, I think you earn it, and you earn it every single day by doing those little things. And the little things are completely attainable by every single person in the world. The only thing I'll add to that is some people, when they do these things, they feel like they hate their life.
Yeah.
Right. And some people, when they do these things, they feel like this is painful, but in retrospect, I'm glad it happened. Right. It's kind of like the gym. Some people go to the gym, they hate their life. Then they leave their gym and they're like, I hated that. I'm never going back. I never want to do it ever again. And the gym's the worst place in the world. And some people go to the gym and they're like, oh, I'm in pain. And then they leave and they're like, my muscles hurt, but I loved it. And so I think the people who love going to the gym and working out their managerial muscles, not from like a power, but like from a getting better perspective, they tend to be, this is obvious, but they tend to be better leaders than people who absolutely hate it. And the people who absolutely hate it, that to me, that's okay, right? Like, let's have you actually not be a people manager. Let's have you be the technical expert.
Yeah.
Let's have you be the highest paid sales rep because you crush quota and everyone else is trying to beat you. Let's have you be the highest paid engineer, right? Who everyone goes to for like technical advice because you're just wicked smart at every single piece of technology that's ever existed, right? That's totally okay by me. Let's just have people in here who want to grow in the, the direction. It's not a single track anymore, right? Like there's enough things we have to be experts at that it's okay to specialize in those things.
Right. And I think you mentioned something important there as well. One of the things that we actively work on is, getting constructive feedback in a positive manner.
Yeah.
So, there are times where, your employees or your the individuals that are under you are not doing their job or they're not performing well. So what would be your kind of process advice for a new manager to
give or to receive? To give. Okay.
Both. I guess both, right? Because
okay.
even getting feedback as a manager is important, but I think giving feedback is more important because you're trying to establish yourself as that person that you can look up to.
You're exactly right. It's harder, and I think the reason it's hard is like what we started with, right? We've all been a part of that group project where you did all the work. Like everyone has that shared experience. There's not one person I've talked to that's like, no. I never did the work.
Right.
Why? We're terrible at giving that constructive feedback about performance to people. Like naturally, it doesn't. We don't do that. We don't get trained at doing that. We actually get trained at doing the opposite, right? Like we all have practice taking it for the team and doing the group project and submitting it. We don't really. There's not a lot of people who have practice doing the broker thing. So here's my tip, right? If you're in a situation where you've got to give positive feedback's easy. We're all good at that. If you've got to give negative feedback and you just do it today, right? If it's really bad, just do it today, get it over with. If you are worried because you just did that and it was so bad, how do you construct a world where giving feedback is easier? I think this is where the tips will be much more helpful.
Right.
So step one is I would say, set the stage where feedback is coming from a kind place, not a mean place. The easiest way to do that depends on your personality, how you want to frame this. But the way I would frame it is like in a one-on-one with every individual on your team, whether you're if you're in person, go for a walk. If it's remote, do it over a private Zoom or Google Meet. And just naturally bring it up and come up with a pact. I think a pact is an interesting word. Hey, let's make a pact right now, right? And you could share the story of I call this the Lettuce Pact. But when I actually do it with my team, I'm let's do a blood pact right now. Spit on the hand and shake on it. But the Lettuce Pact is basically this, right? You can share a story, and if you want to, depends how your style. You can just make up a story. Right? You're listen, when I was in university, I had to present in front of my whole business class. There's 500 people in there. I had to present my thesis or whatever. I had this group project. My group nominated me to go up and do it, and I had to present, right? And no one in my group when I went up to present told me I had salad in my teeth. So I did a 15-minute presentation in front of 500 people. I had food in my teeth. I looked like an idiot, and I saw it because there was photos. I saw it, and I was so embarrassed and ashamed, and I was upset that my team didn't tell me that little piece of feedback that was holding me back from performing to my potential, right? And I actually resent those people now. I actually think it's what they did was worse. What they did was meaner, right, than just telling me. But I know why they did it because I talked to them and they didn't want to embarrass me. Well, what was more embarrassing, right? They actually were being selfish. They didn't want to feel, right? So you set that stage. So you say, let's make a pact. If I ever have lettuce in my teeth, please just tell me. I'll know that it's coming because of this conversation. I'll know it's coming from a place of kindness, right? A place of care and a place of you believing I can be better, right? You knowing I can perform better. And I'll do the same for you. You in? They're going to say yes.
Yeah.
So you shake on it, right? Mentally, you shake on it. And then whenever you have feedback, but then you say listen, it's never going to be lettuce, right? Because we're especially on remote, we see ourselves. It's never going to be lettuce. It's going to be other things, right? It's going to be mansplaining. It's going to be interrupting. It's going to be these other things that are the remote equivalent, right? So you in, they're always in. So then when the time comes, you just jump on Slack, you jump on whatever, and you say, hey, real quick, Lettuce Pact, you were interrupting this person over there. No big deal. Let's just work on it. Let's make it better. Right.
Yeah.
And then they go, oh, dude, totally got it. Thank you. But here's the thing. You can't Lettuce Pact someone unless you make the pact today.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So like step one, right, just go and make that pact. That makes it really easy.
Yeah.
And then practice it. Right. And then the other tip I'll have is like sometimes it's still awkward. Right. The Lettuce Pact just gives you an opener. Sometimes it's still awkward. So 2 things, like one, as a rule, just commit to like never letting it go past the weekend. Once it's past the weekend, it's too late. Right.
Yeah.
So just like try to get it out quick. The second thing, we have a blog post about it, is there's kind of like a framework, a 4-part framework for doing this, for constructive feedback. Just makes your life a little bit easier. So one is the micro yes, right? Which is like, get them to be receptive to feedback. Let them agree to get feedback versus vomiting on their face, like negative stuff. That's where a lot of our anxiety comes from. Lettuce Pact is a short form way to do that. Right. You can say like, hey, Lettuce Pact real quick. Is now an okay time? They're going to say yes or no, whatever. Right. But you can also say, hey, you open to like feedback really quickly on that report you just sent me? They're going to say, yeah. Okay. Yeah. Now they've asked for the feedback in a way, right? They've opened it up. So then you want to get specific. So make sure you're prepared, right? Like, what's the specific feedback? The Lettuce Pact is like an easy analogy because it's so specific. It's like you have teeth. It's like this tooth, it's lettuce there, get it out, right? Mm-hmm. So what's the specific feedback on the report? What's the specific feedback about the interruptions, right? This person was trying to talk about this. You cut them off. They never actually got their point across, right? And you actually diverted the conversation to something else. That was also important, but we need to hear that person's, point to the end. And then describe the impact, right? So what's the impact of that? Well, now actually engineering doesn't know that one thing, and I'm going to have to like quickly go and do a little email or like whatever it is, right? And then make sure, and then open it up for questions. Make sure they understand. Hey, do you understand why this is important? Do you understand impact, or you understand whatever? And make it a dialogue, right?
Right.
Because here's the thing: like they might know information you don't know. You're not necessarily like omnipotent, right? They may be like, oh, actually, engineering already knew that, and I could tell that they were getting, annoyed that this person was bringing it up for the first. Like, oh, okay, that's new information for me. What does that mean? Do I have to give feedback to someone else? I don't know. But there is that 4-part framework kind of battle tested by science, but I still don't think that's enough for the average millennial because we've been like beaten up too bad with social media. Like we're like too sensitive when it comes to like people liking our stuff. Yeah. So I think the Lettuce Pact like gives you a common shared experience and like make it meaningful, right? Like make it weird. That level will remember it, right? Like it gives you this moment to go back to and say, hey, we're going to be vulnerable with each other from a good place, right? So you're ready for the good feeling, right? Not the negative feeling. And then you can kind of go into it.
Dude, I love that. I saw your post about that on LinkedIn, and I was like, this is a really cool story. I can see how this works. And like something that it kind of came to me as you were saying this, and you ended up mentioning it before I could even get it out, was a whole millennial thing. Like we are more susceptible to that kind of sensitivity in the sense that, we were trained a different way. Like we entered a different world, to the point, like, it's like a running joke when managers put ... like we think we're going to get fired, right?
Yeah.
Like, like those little things.
Yeah, big time. And as a manager, by the way, don't do that, right? Like if you're on Slack, don't be like, hey, can you chat real quick? Don't send that. Don't hit enter. We were trained as managers on MSN Messenger, like, yo, enter. What's up? Enter. Yeah. Like, right? Don't do that on Slack. As a manager, you stress people out. Just be like, hey, do you have time to chat really quickly about this one topic that's like really inconsequential and won't get you fired? Send.
Right.
Yeah.
That's so much more reassuring. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I feel like Soapbox, like the business itself is kind of reducing a lot of that friction, right? Like a good way to put that is just reducing that friction, which is going to resonate with that millennial generation a lot because we hate having those conversations and we hate dealing with those awkward situations. And so that's kind of what like led me to this question. And I want to get your opinion on this and kind of where you see like the future of work, because I really like the idea of Soapbox going forward, because if we're moving to a more virtual world, work-life balance and kind of managing those things, like having those manager conversations is just another thing that's going to be intruding into that life, right? So something a bit more, I don't know, nice. I don't want to say nice, but you know what I'm trying to say. Something a bit more nuanced, something a bit more kind of more targeted like this will be helpful. So kind of what is your expectation on what the future of work is going to look like? Like, where do you see Soapbox maybe 5-10 years down the road?
Yeah, that's a good thought. So I think there's like a couple angles to look at. But the first thing I want to say is like everyone in the world just got a taste of what we're calling remote work.
Right.
And I think it's important to say like what we just experienced is pandemic work, right? Like, yes, we're working from home. We're doing Zoom calls. Sure, we can call that like partially remote. But we're also like isolated pretty extremely, right? Like it's not like you can just go to the pub after work.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's not like you can go meet up with like the local employees. It's not like you can go and do a team retreat. So I think what we've experienced is like what technology is capable of, but not necessarily what humans are capable of. And so when I think of the future of work, there's like two things I have to look at. One is what are kids doing?
Mm-hmm.
Right? They don't care. They just do. And they don't know the difference between like high tech, low tech, right? And the second thing is what have humans always done? Right? Like what is unchanging? And I think when those two paths converge, you get a good sense of like what the next generation is going to bring. So, I'll tell you like a difference between my generation and like, the next generation is like, I remember used to running home from school and like getting to my buddy's house or my house and we'd play the latest video game, right? Like we would both grab a controller and like try to beat it. And it'd be like we would like run. We'd be like, no, we need that extra 30 minutes to play. Kids still do that because kids like to play games. It's like innate, right? But they run home to their own homes and they play online, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of these cases, even with our generation, right? Like there are friends that are very close for Call of Duty buddies, right? Who you've played Call of Duty with for 14 years straight, who live in Texas. Like you don't know where they live. You've never met these people before. And yet they're some of your closest friends, right? So in a world where that exists, do we think we have to be in that office place? No, probably not.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
If some of your closest friends, like if you think you can't build culture remotely, yet you can build the closest friends you'll probably ever have over a course of your life playing Call of Duty on an Xbox Live, then I think your concept of how to build culture is flawed. And in fact, I actually think you probably have never intentionally built culture as a manager or a leader before. You've let culture naturally happen. And so you say, oh, well, now culture doesn't naturally happen. So therefore it doesn't. It's like, no, you just got to do a good job at it. You've never done that before. You got to learn.
Yeah.
So I think what are this generation of kids doing? They're FaceTiming each other, right? They're not texting. Our MSN Messenger experience is FaceTime for them, right? They're Snapchatting, they're TikToking, they're doing all these things. That's going to come into the workforce. The stuff that's never changed, right? We're still reading The Art of War, right? Why? What about that book is still relevant? Because I'll tell you, like no one's read it, or people have read it, but like no one really reads it. Because he's like, they read the Spark Notes. Because the real book is like, by the way, like after you conquer the enemy, burn the soldiers alive.
Right.
Like
right.
no one's referencing that part of the book, right? But like, what are we referencing in that book that's still relevant? Because at the end of the day, we're all humans, right? This next generation of kids, they know technology. They're going to be embarrassed by spreadsheets. They're going to be embarrassed by notepads, right? They're going to think that that's weird. But are they still going to have meetings? Are they still going to look each other in the face? For sure they will, right? Are they still going to have empathy? For sure. Are they going to have a harder time embarrassing someone in front of their peer? Probably, because embarrassment has been quantified in a way that's never been possible before, right? Like people delete photos on Instagram when they don't get enough likes now. Like I never had that experience, but a whole generation of kids did. So like what happens on Slack now and like you don't get, I don't know. So when I kind of look towards the future, I kind of look at those two trend lines. And so the stuff that we're building towards is the unchangeable constants that humans have needed since they became organized, right? You go all the way back to like some of the earliest records in any civilization is like what they wrote down on paper, and the plans they built. So for us, that's, what do you want to write down on paper? I just think it's embarrassing that the highest paid people at your company is using a paper in 2021, right? Like the CEO of $1 billion business is like doing his job on paper or her job on paper. Like, I think we got to move past that. And it's the rise and grind stuff, right? It's the, win the every day, hold people accountable, motivate people, drive people towards a shared goal, a shared vision, shared belief. The medium that we do it in is going to be different, right? But some of the stuff are going to be constant, like, people. We're all going to go to work and work with other people. I think that's going to be constant. There's definitely going to be robots that take over industries, but humans will move to a different part, right?
Yeah,
for sure. Yeah. Dude, I think you've hit so many things on point with kind of what's going on in the culture as well. Like, especially right now, with return to work and things like that, I don't want to, call out the boomers, but there is that conversation about, people don't want to work anymore. Like, how is this? And you hit that right. You're probably not doing the right things. You're probably not building the right culture if you think you can't do this virtually.
Well, even jumping back, like people, I would say almost everybody rather wants performance over presence, right? Including those bosses. Yet they don't know how to manage performance. So instead they manage presence, right?
Right.
That's the office. That's why they want to go back, because they don't know how to manage performance. Everyone wants to be managed by their results, right? You want good results, not busyness, right? You don't want to be running around feeling busy. You just want the right outcomes. But people manage busyness. They don't manage outcomes, right?
Right.
It just turns out like real good management work is not, your default pattern, right? Like, it does take a lot of work to get those things right. And it takes a lot of different skills you maybe haven't developed. And it's harder to do it remote. But if you're managing, if you're a really good manager, it doesn't matter, right? Exactly. Like if we're pretending like Coca-Cola's 150 year old company, and they have like Coca-Cola in India, and they have Coca-Cola in Canada, and they have Coca-Cola in America. Like, what do you think, they're sharing an office? They're not sharing an office. Like, this remote thing isn't new, right? It's just, hey, the good managers, Intel, like the big companies who became wildly successful, they figured it out before there was Zoom. They figured it out before there was Slack. They would mail shit to I'm assuming they would mail stuff to each other, right? And they figured out how to manage on like paper and mail. And we're pretending like we can't figure it out on Zoom. Come on, guys. Like, just got to work a little harder. Except the work a little harder isn't like busy work.
Measure performance, not presence. I like that. I think
manage that. Yeah, that's right.
I think that's a great point to end it on, Brennan. One thing we like to do to end our podcast is we shoot some quick questions at you in a lightning round, just to get to know you a bit better and maybe put you on the spot,
Okay, I'll try my best.
So just some quick questions here, and let us know the first things that come to mind. So first off, what is your favorite book or movie of all time? Don't say Art of War.
No. Okay, so most influential book for me, Just Six Numbers by Sir Martin Rees. It's about the 6 universal constants that exist in our universe. And if they're anything different, like the speed of light is like 1 meter per second faster, or like 1 millimeter per second faster, like stars can't form, or like life can't be created. And it's just this really interesting, discussion and topic about what would life look like if those numbers were different. But, you get to a point where, sorry for the whining, like, why are they that way?
Yeah.
Like, why are these 6 numbers constant? Why can they not change? And I just thought that was really interesting, and it set me into like a deep, dark depression, which I then came out of a better person. I read that one in high school. So probably most influential book.
For sure. I love it, man. I'm going to have to check that one out. Next question here. What is one company that you're super excited about right now? It can be any field.
One company I'm super excited about. Well, actually, there's two. Like, I think Zencastr is really interesting. I think Riverside is really interesting. I think they're taking something. There's a lot of experts in the world, and it's hard. It's hard to have them, be media people. And I think the more we give the metaphorical pen to the experts, I think the more power we give to smart people. So if you can, allow scientists to create, decently produced TV shows, I think that's pretty cool. If you can allow, marketing experts or finance experts to create their own content and not have it filtered through someone else, I think these are really interesting things that are happening where, we can all kind of be media companies in our spare time. That's super exciting to me. One company I'm studying is Calendly. I don't know if you've seen this company, but it allows you to book meetings without having to email each other back and forth. Does one thing very, very, very well. And they make, I think last I checked, they make $60 million a year, and they basically raise no funding. So they've built a really interesting system that makes money.
For sure.
I think it's an interesting one to study.
Yeah, for sure. Last question here. It tends to be the most controversial one. Do you like pineapples on your pizza?
Have to. Mandatory.
Oh,
yeah, it's like weird.
Oof.
People who says no to that? It's the least controversial question you can come up with. Yeah, but
I do.
What's wrong with you?
Dude, I don't know why.
I just can't do it. I just can't do it.
And it's such a like controversial thing on dating apps. Like that's like a sticking point
Really?
for a
It's
lot of
fake.
people. Like
It's fake. It's got to be fake because it's delicious. It's like people who are like, "Oh, I don't like Krispy Kreme donuts." It's like, yeah, sure, you don't like Krispy Kreme donuts, but you actually do. You just don't want to admit it, or you don't want to go near there because you accidentally buy a dozen Krispy Kreme donuts and eat them all, and then you feel really bad about yourself, and you don't like that part. But like, how can you not like pizza's great, pineapples are great, put them together, it's great.
Love it. Brandon, thank you so much for this. We had a blast, and we think we're doing something incredible with Soapbox, and I think you're going to help a lot of millennials, man. So we love what you're doing.
Thank you guys for having me anytime.